$250. That was the price tag they put on 16 years of my life. Enough to buy a second-hand color television in 1975. Enough for maybe 2 months' rent in some dingy apartment in the city. Or in my case, enough for a one-way ticket to a future I could not begin to imagine. I am telling you this story now because my grandson needs to hear it. Jack is 17 years old, and 3 months ago he lost his father. My son, Michael. The boy showed up at my door in Montana with rage in his eyes and grief eating him alive from the inside out. Last night he sat on my porch and told me I did not understand anything, that I never lost anyone, that I had everything while he had nothing, that I did not know what it felt like to be thrown away by the world. So I told him to sit down and listen, because 50 years ago I stood exactly where he stands now. And the only reason I am still here is because someone gave me a chance to build something from nothing. This is that story. The day everything changed was a Tuesday in late October 1975. America had just pulled out of Vietnam. The oil crisis had gas prices through the roof. Watergate had shattered whatever faith people still had in institutions. Young folks everywhere were trying to get off the grid and back to the land. I did not know any of that. I was 16 years old and I was standing on the top step of the Northwood Group Home for Boys. That was the only home I had known for 4 years, the only place that would take me after my parents died. The sky over the city looked like a dirty dish rag, low and heavy with the promise of a winter that did not care if you were ready for it. The air was sharp and cold, and I could feel it seeping through the worn soles of my boots. Everything I owned in the world was packed into a single black duffel bag cutting into my shoulder. One change of clothes, a worn paperback novel, a toothbrush, and a manila envelope that felt both impossibly heavy and completely weightless at the same time. Mrs. Patricia Harmon stood in the doorway behind me. She was my case manager. Not a bad person, really, just tired. About 50 years old with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun and a brown office dress that had gone shiny at the elbows and cuffs from too many years of wear. Her face carried that permanent look of strained sympathy, the kind of expression you see on people who have to deliver bad news for a living. Day after day after day, her job was to process kids like me, move us from one box on a spreadsheet to another. Today I was being moved to the closed column. "Nathan," she said, her voice was flat and practiced, "this is your final disbursement. $250 in your Greyhound ticket. The bus leaves at 2. I took the thin envelope from her hand. The paper felt flimsy, unreal. $250. It sounded like real money when you had nothing. But I was old enough to know it was nothing at all. It was severance pay for a childhood, just enough to get me out of their sight, just enough so they could tell themselves they had not thrown me out with empty pockets. And the other thing I said, my voice sounded distant to my own ears, like it was coming from someone standing far away. She sighed, a small puff of white in the cold air. She reached back inside and came out with a single folded piece of legal paper, yellow and creased with age. "The addendum from your grandfather's estate," she said. "The transfer has been registered with the county clerk up there. It is yours now." I looked at that paper. Bill of sale for one Quonset hut located on a 5-acre parcel in rural Braxton County, Montana. The price listed was $15, a fee I had paid 1 month earlier to a lawyer I had never met, paid with a money order I bought using cash saved from mopping floors at the group home. $15. It was the most absurd and terrifying thing I had ever owned. "Thank you," I said. The words came out automatic and useless. Mrs. Harmon gave me a short, tight nod. "Be safe, Nathan. Try to make good choices." It was the same thing she told every kid who walked out that door, a prayer and a dismissal wrapped into one sentence. She did not hug me. They never did. Physical contact was a liability issue. She just stepped back into the warmth of the building, and the heavy door clicked shut behind her. That sound echoed down the empty concrete steps, and something in me understood that everything before this moment was over. Done. Filed away. 4 years of bells telling me when to wake up, when to eat, when to sleep. 4 years of weekly counseling sessions where I learned to say the right things without feeling any of them. 4 years of being a case file, a problem to be managed, a number in a system that processed children like widgets on an assembly line. Now I was just me, a 16-year-old boy standing on a sidewalk, holding a bus ticket to a place I had never seen, holding the deed to a metal shed I bought for less than the cost of 3 fast food meals. I turned and walked away from that building without looking back. There was nothing to look back at. Nothing and no one. The Greyhound bus in 1975 was a world unto itself. Cracked vinyl seats and the smell of cigarette smoke baked into every surface because back then you could still smoke on buses. The other passengers carried their own stories with them. A young soldier just home from overseas with eyes that looked 1,000 years old. A single mother with 2 small children trying to keep them quiet. A man in a cheap suit who kept glancing at the door at every stop like he was running from something. I found a seat by a window, smeared with grime, and pressed my duffel bag into my lap. When the bus pulled away from the curb, I watched the gray buildings of the city slide past and felt nothing. Not sadness, not excitement, not even fear. Just a hollow emptiness that seemed to fill every part of me. I was a ghost leaving a graveyard. The bus was my hearse, driving me not to a final resting place but to whatever came next. And I had no idea what that was. I only knew it was cold, and it was a long way away. The bus ride took 18 hours, broken up by 2 transfers in dingy, fluorescent-lit stations that all smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant. I did not sleep. I just watched the world change outside my window. The city gave way to suburbs. The suburb melted into farmland that stretched flat and brown to the horizon. The harvest had finished long ago, and the fields lay empty under a gray sky. Then the land started to ripple, to swell into hills that grew into mountains draped in pine and the bare branches of hardwoods waiting for winter. The farther north we went, the more the colors drained from the world. Everything became shades of gray and brown and white, where early snow dusted the higher elevations. I kept my hand on the manila envelope in my duffel bag. It held my birth certificate, my social security card, and the strange bill of sale for the Quonset hut. During those long hours on the bus, I thought about the man who had sent me here. My grandfather, Henry Cole, a ghost from my early childhood. Someone I barely remembered. My parents had spoken of him before they were gantinan. They called him difficult, eccentric, a recluse who wanted nothing to do with the rest of the world. After they died in the accident, when I was 12, he became my only living relative. But he did not take me in. Instead, he set up a trust. It paid for the group home, paid for Mrs. Harmon, paid for my existence as a ward of the state, all from a safe distance. He never visited, never wrote, never called. I used to lie awake in my bunk at Northwood and imagine him living in some mansion somewhere, forgetting he even had a grandson. I pictured him as a cruel old man who simply could not be bothered with a child. I built up years of hatred for someone I did not even know. When he died 2 years before, I felt a bitter, empty satisfaction. The lawyers handling his estate had sent a letter to the group home. It explained that the trust would continue until my 18th birthday or until I was legally emancipated. It also mentioned the addendum, a strange offer of property in Braxton County, Montana. Mrs. Harmon had explained it to me in her sterile little office. Your grandfather's will has an unusual provision, Nathan. It says you can be declared a mature minor at 16. That means you would be on your own. The trust would dissolve. You would get a small final payment and the property would be yours. If you accept the terms. The terms were simple. I had to formally request the emancipation myself, and I had to pay the $15 transfer fee for the Quonset hut. It was a test, she had said, a way out, or you can stay here for 2 more years. It is your choice. 2 more years of bells and rules. 2 more years of being someone else's problem. 2 more years of feeling like I was living in a waiting room for a life that never seemed to arrive. I chose the Quonset hut. I chose the unknown. At least the unknown would be mine. The last bus dropped me at a gas station in the middle of nowhere just as the sun was setting. One pop, a convenience store with windows plastered in old beer signs and Coca-Cola advertisements. A handmade sign above the door that just said "Get and Go" in plastic letters. Some of the letters were missing. The air here was different, colder, cleaner, smelling of pine trees and damp earth and snow waiting to fall. This is it for you, son, the bus driver said as he pulled my duffel from the storage compartment and dropped it on the gravel. Braxton County line. Town is another 5 miles down that road. He pointed a thick thumb toward a two-lane blacktop that curved away into a forest already going dark with shadow. Is there a cab? I asked. Another bus. The driver laughed without humor. You are looking at the only bus that comes through here, and it is heading back south. You will be walking. He climbed back aboard, and with a hiss of air brakes, he was gone, taillights disappearing around a bend in the road, leaving me alone in the growing twilight. And that was the first time I truly heard silence. Back in the city, there was always noise, sirens, traffic, the constant hum of a million lives pressed together. Here the silence was a physical presence, a weight that settled over everything. It was broken only by the sigh of wind in the tall pines and the distant call of a crow. I stood there on that empty roadside, and for the first time in my life, I felt how small I really was, how small we all are against the vastness of the world. And strange as it sounds, that feeling was not terrifying. It was almost liberating. All my problems back in the city had seemed so enormous, so overwhelming. Out here, they shrank down to nothing. Out here, there was only the road and the trees and the darkening sky and me. I pulled the legal paper from my pocket and unfolded it. On the back, my grandfather had drawn a map in that spiky, angular handwriting of his. It showed the gas station where I stood, the road heading toward town, and a turnoff about 3 miles down. Find the fallen oak, the note said. Gravel path 1 mile in. I zipped up my thin jacket as far as it would go, pulled my knit cap down over my ears, settled the duffel bag strap across my shoulder where it bit into the same sore spot it always found. Then I started walking. The 5 miles to the town of Braxton felt more like 10. My boots were worn thin, and every step on the rough pavement sent jolts of pain through my heels where blisters were forming. The sun vanished completely. The world became a tunnel of darkness, with my weak flashlight carving a pale path ahead of me. The woods pressed close on both sides, alive with sounds I could not identify. A twig snapping somewhere in the black, leaves rustling, the low call of an owl hunting in the night. Every noise made the hair on my arms stand straight up. I was not used to this kind of wildness. My whole world had been concrete and chain-link fences. Braxton was not much of a town when I finally reached it. A single main street with a few dozen buildings, most of them dark at this hour, a courthouse with a lit clock tower, a diner with a buzzing neon sign that said Rosie's, a small grocery store, a bar called the Rusty Nail with country music spilling faintly from behind its door. I was exhausted and starving. The last of my bus station snacks had run out hours ago. I pushed into the grocery store and a bell chimed above the door. An old man behind this counter looked up from his newspaper. His eyes narrowed with that casual suspicion that small towns reserve for strangers. I bought a loaf of bread and a jar of peanut butter and a bottle of Coca-Cola. The total was more than I expected. My $250 was already starting to feel very small. I ate standing on the sidewalk outside, tearing off chunks of bread and scooping peanut butter with my fingers. The Coke was cold and sweet. It was the best meal I had ever had, not because of the taste, because it was mine, bought with money I controlled, eaten in a place I had chosen. The turnoff came about an hour later, just as my grandfather's map had promised. A massive oak tree split down the middle by lightning leaned tiredly across the road. A gravel path barely wide enough for a car wound away into darkness. This was it, the final step. Down this path was my new life, or the end of it. I pushed aside the fear and walked. The gravel crunched loud beneath my boots. The path was rough and rutted, and I stumbled several times in the dark. It climbed steadily uphill, and my lungs burned in the thin, cold air. After what felt like another hour, the trees parted, and I stepped into a clearing. And there it was, bigger than I had imagined, a long, curved arch of corrugated metal rising from the earth like the shell of some giant beetle, half buried in the ground. Rust covered it in great weeping patches, the color of dried blood. Weeds and small saplings grew thick around its base as high as my waist. One of the two large sliding doors at the front hung crooked on its track, slightly open, like a mouth frozen mid-word. It looked abandoned, forgotten, dead, a monument to things left behind. This was my inheritance, my $15 home. A wave of despair hit me so hard I nearly sat down right there in the weeds. What had I done? I had traded a warm bed and 3 meals a day for this. A rusted metal shell in the middle of nowhere. No electricity, no running water, no heat. Winter was coming, and I was standing in front of a building that looked like it might collapse if I leaned on it wrong. I wanted to turn around, walk back to town, get on the next bus going anywhere else. But there was no anywhere else. There was no one waiting for me, no place to go back to. This was the end of the line, and the only way forward was through. My hands shook as I approached that crooked door. I put my shoulder against it and pushed. Metal screamed against metal as it scraped along the rusted track, but it moved, just enough for me to slip through into the darkness beyond. The air inside was colder than outside. It held a thick, musty smell of damp and decay and mouse droppings. My flashlight cut a weak path through the cavern of black. The space was huge, much larger than it looked from outside. The curved ceiling disappeared into shadows high above. The concrete floor was cracked and covered with debris, piles of junk everywhere, rotted wooden crates, rusted machine parts, stacks of old tires, shapes hidden under tarps so dusty they had turned gray. It looked like someone had used this place as a dumping ground for 50 years and then walked away. I swept my light around the space and my heart sank lower with every inch it revealed. This was a tomb, a cold, forgotten tomb, and it was mine. I walked deeper inside. My footsteps echoed in the vast, silent space, and then my light caught something in the far corner, almost hidden behind a stack of crumbling wooden pallets. A military footlocker, olive drab, the kind you see in old war movies. It was clean and solid and secured with a heavy-duty padlock. It was the only thing in this entire place that did not look like garbage. My heart beat a little faster. What was inside? Money. Some kind of treasure my eccentric grandfather had left for me. Hope flickered in my chest, and fragile and foolish, but there nonetheless. I set down my duffel bag. I was home. Or at least I was at the address. The difference between those two things felt like a million miles. That first night in the Quonset was the longest night of my life. I had no sleeping bag, only my thin jacket and the clothes I wore. I found a corner that seemed cleaner than the rest, swept away the worst of the dirt with my boot, curled up on the concrete floor with my duffel as a pillow. The cold was a living thing. It crept up from the ground through my clothes and settled deep into my bones. I shivered so hard my whole body ached. My teeth chattered until my jaw was sore. Every creak of the metal walls sounded like a threat. Every gust of wind rattling the loose door made my heart jump. I lay there in the pitch black, listening to the darkness and waiting for dawn, feeling more alone than I had ever felt in my entire life. When morning finally came, it was a weak, gray light filtering through the grime on small windows set high in the curved walls. I was stiff and sore and numb with cold. But I was alive. That felt like a victory. My first priority was that footlocker. The padlock was thick and sturdy. I had no key. I spent an hour digging through the junk piles until I found a length of steel rebar heavy enough to use as a pry bar. I wedged it into the padlock hasp and threw all of my weight against it. Once, twice, 3 times. The metal groaned. My muscles screamed. On the 4th try, the hasp snapped with a crack like a gunshot. My hands were trembling as I lifted the heavy lid. Inside, I found a wool blanket folded neatly on top. Army issue, thick and scratchy. Beneath that were cans of food, beans, stew, peaches, a manual can opener, a small camp stove with a full fuel canister, a first aid kit, a heavy-duty flashlight much better than mine, batteries, and a set of quality hand tools, hammer, screwdrivers, wrench, handsaw, practical, survival supplies. Disappointing. I had been hoping for a miracle, some magic solution to the disaster my life had become. This was just stuff. Useful stuff, sure, but it was not going to fix the hole in my world. Then I saw it. At the very bottom of the footlocker lay a thick manila envelope, 9 by 12, sealed with heavy-duty tape. My name was written on the front in that same spiky handwriting from the map. Nathan. This was the real inheritance. I sat down on the dusty floor with my back against the cold metal of the footlocker, carefully slit the envelope open with the blade of the can opener. Inside were 2 things, First, a thin stack of documents held together with a paperclip, the official deed to the 5 acres, free and clear in my name, a soil survey, a plat map. Second was a letter, 20 pages, handwritten on yellow legal paper. It began simply, Dear Nathan, if you are reading this, then I am gone and you have found your way here. I hope the journey was not too difficult. I also hope you are not too angry with me. There are things you need to know, things I have kept secret for 4 years. Not because I did not trust you, but because I was afraid the truth would get you killed. I stopped reading. My throat went tight. I took a deep breath and continued. Your parents did not die in a simple car accident, Nathan. They got involved with dangerous people, a loan sharking operation that was part of a larger criminal network. They owed a lot of money, and their deaths were not an accident. Their car was sabotaged. It was a message to anyone else who might think about not paying what they owed. The words blurred. I blinked hard and kept reading. These people made it clear that the debt would be passed on to the next of kin. To you, Nathan, to a 12-year-old boy. I could not take you in. It would have been a death sentence for both of us. They would have found us. The only way to keep you safe was to make you disappear, to hide you in the one place they would never look, the foster care system. A ward of the state has no assets, no family to extort. You became a ghost, invisible to them. It was the hardest decision I ever made, to let you go, to let you believe I had abandoned you. It was a choice between your happiness and your life. I chose your life. I pray every day that someday you will understand and forgive me. I had to stop reading, the anger I had carried for 4 years, that hard, bitter stone in my chest. It was dissolving, crumbling apart, and in its place rushed a wave of shock so powerful I could not breathe. He had not abandoned me. He had saved me. All those years I thought I was thrown away. I was actually being protected, hidden in plain sight, kept alive by the very system I had resented. I wiped my eyes on my sleeve and forced myself to continue. This place, this land, this ugly metal shed, this is your head start. It is not much, but it is yours. No one can take it from you. The world thinks you are a charity case, a boy with nothing. Let them think it. What you have here is better than money. It is a place to stand your ground. He went on to explain about the Quonset itself, its flaws, the leaks in the roof, the lack of insulation, and then he gave me instructions. There is a loose section of flooring at the northwest corner, right where the wall starts to curve down. Pry it up. What is underneath is for you, not a fortune, just seed money I managed to put aside over the years without anyone noticing. Use it to make this place a home. Do not sell it, Nathan. Do not run. Build something. Character is not what you are given. It is what you build from the scraps you have. This is your scrap. Make it a fortress. The letter ended with words that broke something open inside me. I am sorry I could not be the grandfather you deserved. I hope you can build the life you deserve. I love you, kid. I set the pages down in my lap. A sound came out of my throat, raw and ragged, the sound of something that had been locked away for years finally breaking free. I cried. I cried for the parents I barely remembered, their memory now stained with a darker truth. I cried for the lonely boy in the group home who thought his own grandfather did not want him. I cried for the old man who had lived with a terrible secret, who made an impossible choice and died alone hoping his grandson would someday understand. I sat there on that cold concrete floor surrounded by junk and decay, and I cried until nothing was left. The sun had climbed higher. A single beam of light shone through a grimy window, cutting through the darkness, landing on the letter in my lap like a sign. The despair I had felt the night before was gone. The fear was still there, but it was different now. Not the fear of being alone and abandoned. It was the fear of failure, the fear of not being able to live up to the faith this man had placed in me. I looked around at the vast empty space of the Quonset, and for the first time I did not see a ruin. I saw raw material. I saw possibility. I saw the starting line of a race I had not known I was running. In that moment, I made a choice. I would not sell. I would not run. I would stay. I would build. I stood up slowly, muscles stiff from the cold and from sleeping on concrete. My grandfather said there was something hidden in the northwest corner. Time to find it. I walked to where the curved wall met the foundation. The floor was covered with dirt and debris. I scraped it away with a piece of scrap wood until I found concrete beneath. Then I ran my hands over the surface, feeling for anything different. There, a section about 2 feet square. It did not feel like solid concrete. It felt like wood covered with a thin layer of cement wash and dirt, camouflaged. I worked the tip of the rebar into a hairline crack, pulled hard. A section of the floor came loose with a snap. Beneath it was a hollow space, and inside that space was a small steel ammunition box. Heavy when I lifted it. The box was not locked. I opened the lid. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a thick bundle of cash. All 20s, held together with rubber bands. I did not count it right then. Just seeing it made my head spin. More money than I had ever seen in one place. Beside the cash was another manila envelope. This one held a series of hand-drawn diagrams and schematics, incredibly detailed. The title was written at the top in my grandfather's blocky letters: Off-Grid Power and Water System. Basic. There were drawings for a simple rainwater collection system using the curved roof, plans for a wood-burning stove showing how to safely install a flue through the metal wall, and a multi-page guide to setting up a basic electrical system. Not solar panels. Those were too expensive in 1975. But car batteries, a small gasoline generator, 12-volt lights. It was practical, achievable. Everything I would need to turn this cold shell into something livable. A final note was tucked into the back of the schematics. Kid, this money should cover the basics. Light and power are what separate a shelter from a home. They are what keep the darkness at bay, both outside and in. Do not be afraid of the work. You come from strong stock. You are harder than you think. The instructions are all here. Read them, then read them again. Measure twice. Cut once. You can do this. Build something that lasts your life. I carefully packed everything back into the ammunition box. The money, the plans. This was my arsenal. My war chest for the battle ahead. The battle against the cold, against the decay, against the loneliness, against the voice in my head that said I was just a kid and I could not do this. The sun was climbing higher outside. Light was beginning to warm the rusted metal walls of my new home. I stood there in the middle of chaos and ruin, holding my grandfather's letter like a treasure map. But the treasure was not the money in the box. The treasure was the truth. I had not been thrown away. I had been sent on a mission, and I intended to complete it, no matter how long it took, no matter how hard it got. That was my promise to the man who sacrificed everything to keep me safe. That was my promise to myself. My grandson Jack sat across from me at the fire pit, watching the flames dance against the Montana darkness. The anger that had twisted his face when he first arrived was starting to soften. Something else was taking its place. Curiosity, maybe, or the beginning of understanding. "So how did you do it?" he asked. "You were 16. You did not know anything, alone in the middle of nowhere. How did you not just give up?" I smiled at that question because I had asked it of myself 1,000 times over the years. "The truth is, I did give up," I told him. Many times. Every morning I woke up with my muscles screaming and looked at the mountain of work ahead of me, and I wanted to quit. Every single day. Then how are you still here? Because giving up for a moment is not the same as giving up forever. You can feel hopeless in the morning and still pick up a hammer in the afternoon. You can cry yourself to sleep at night and still get up when the sun rises. Giving up is a moment. Continuing is a habit. I chose the habit. The fire crackled between us, and I could see him turning that idea over in his mind, trying it on for size. "Let me tell you about that first winter," I said. "Let me tell you what it really took. The morning after I found my grandfather's letter, I woke before dawn. Every joint in my body ached from sleeping on concrete. My breath made clouds in the freezing air inside the Quonset. But something had changed. The despair that had crushed me the night before was gone. In its place was something harder. Something with edges. Purpose. I had work to do. The first week was nothing but cleaning. I tied a rag over my nose and mouth because I did not have a proper mask yet, put on the work gloves from my grandfather's footlocker, And I went to war with 50 years of filth. I dragged out mountains of garbage, rotted wood that fell apart in my hands, rusted metal that left orange stains on my gloves, broken glass that I wrapped in newspaper before throwing away so I would not cut myself later. I found nests of mice in the corners and swept them out along with decades of droppings. Spiderwebs hung from the ceiling in sheets so thick they looked like gray curtains. The sound of metal scraping on concrete echoed through that huge empty space as I pulled debris across the floor. My arms burned. My back screamed. By the end of each day, I was covered in a layer of grime so thick I could write my name in it. Every night I collapsed onto that wool blanket, too exhausted to finish the can of beans I had opened for dinner. And every morning I woke up and did it again. You want to know the hardest part? I asked Jack. It was not the physical work. It was the silence. No radio because I had no electricity. No books because I had no light to read by. No one to talk to. Just me and my thoughts. And thoughts can become your worst enemy when there is nothing to distract you from them. Every doubt I had ever felt about myself came crawling out of the darkness during those long nights. Every cruel word any kid at the group home had ever said. Every time I had wondered if my grandfather was right to abandon me. All of it playing on repeat in my head. But I kept working. And slowly the Quonset began to change. By the end of that first week, I could see the floor. Really see it. Cracked concrete, yes. Stained and ugly, but solid. A foundation I could build on. My second trip into town was different from the first. I was no longer a lost, frightened kid stumbling in from the darkness. I was a young man with a purpose. I walked those 5 miles with my head up and my eyes forward. At the hardware store, the same old man stood behind the counter. Frank Dawson. Though I did not know his name yet, he watched me walk the aisles pulling items from the shelves. Heavy-duty cleaning supplies, buckets, thick work gloves better than the ones I had, tubes of industrial sealant, roofing cement. Big project, he asked as he rang me up. His voice was still gruff, but the suspicion in his eyes had been replaced by something else. Curiosity, maybe? Something like that, I said. Fixing up an old place out past the fallen oak. He grunted. The old Miller Quonset. Thought that place was going to cave in on itself years ago. He studied me for a moment. You are the grandson, then. Word travels fast in a small town. Everyone knows everyone else's business before you even know it yourself. Yes, sir, I said. That is me. Frank finished adding up my purchases. The total took a significant chunk of my money, but I had expected that. Everything costs more out here. Shipping costs, he explained. Nothing came cheap to a town at the end of a long road to nowhere. Well, good luck to you, son, he said as he handed me my change. And there was something new in his voice, maybe respect, maybe just the recognition of someone attempting something difficult. It is a hell of a lot of work, I know, I said, but it is mine. He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Your grandfather used to say the same thing, about a lot of things. He reached under the counter and pulled out a slim book with a worn cover. This belonged to him, Frank said. Basic Home Repair Guide. He left it here a few years back. Told me to give it to you when you showed up. I took the book and felt my throat tighten. He left it for me. Before he died. He knew I would come. He talked about you, Frank continued. Not a lot. Henry was not much for talking. But enough. He said you were smart. Said you would figure things out. The weight of that book in my hands felt like a message from beyond the grave. A hand reaching back through time to steady me. At the library, I met Martha Chen. She was the town librarian. A woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a gentle voice. Her family had come to Montana 2 generations back, and she had lived in Braxton for 30 years. She knew everyone and everything. You are Henry Cole's grandson, she said when I came looking for books on construction and electrical work. It was not a question. Yes, ma'am. She smiled, and the warmth in it caught me off guard. I was not used to warmth from strangers. He used to come here every week, she said. Read everything we had on engineering and history. Sometimes detective novels when he wanted to relax. She paused, and her eyes grew soft with memory. He talked about you. Said someday you would come here, and when you did, I should help you find what you needed. I did not know what to say. This man I had hated for 4 years. This stranger who I thought had abandoned me. He had been here all along, preparing, waiting. believing in a grandson he could never see. "What do you need?" Martha asked. "Everything," I said. "I need to learn everything." She laughed and led me to the shelves. I spent hours in that little library reading about basic construction and insulation and electrical systems, taking notes on scraps of paper, asking Martha questions when the books did not make sense. She never made me feel stupid for not knowing things. She just explained them again in different words until I understood. That is one of the greatest gifts anyone can give you, Jack. Patience with your ignorance. Not everyone has it. Treasure the ones who do. Back at the Quonset, the real work began. The roof and walls were my first priority. Winter was coming, and every hole was an invitation for cold air and rain and snow. I spent days on a rickety ladder I had found in the debris pile. Had to repair the ladder itself before I could use it. Every rung checked and tightened. Measure twice, cut once. My grandfather's words echoed in my head with every task. I patched holes with roofing cement and squares of sheet metal bought from Frank's store. Sealed every seam and bolt hole and crack I could find. The work was tedious and frustrating. My hands blistered and bled. More than once I nearly fell from that ladder when a gust of wind caught me off balance. The first time I tried to patch a large hole in the roof, the repair fell off before I even climbed down. The second time it held for 3 days, then peeled away in a rainstorm. I sat in the Quonset that night with water dripping on my head and wanted to scream. But I went back to the books, studied how the original seams had been made, realized I had been overlapping the metal the wrong way. Water flows downhill. The patches needed to be layered like shingles so rain would run over them, not under them. The third attempt held. It is still holding 50 years later. Insulation was the next challenge. Those bare metal walls radiated cold like the inside of a refrigerator. In 1975, there was no fancy foam insulation you could order online. No YouTube videos showing you exactly what to do. I had to improvise with what was available. Martha found me books about insulating Quonset huts. Turned out the military had built thousands of them during World War II, and people had been figuring out how to make them livable ever since. I learned about using layers of newspaper and cardboard as a base, about packing hay bales along the bottom of the walls where the cold crept in worst. Frank sold me a paste made from flour and water that I could use to glue newspaper to the metal walls. It was the same stuff people had used for decades. Cheap and effective. I collected old newspapers from the library. Martha saved them for me every week. I spent hours mixing paste and layering paper and smoothing out bubbles until my arms felt like they would fall off. Then I got hay bales from a farmer outside town. Bill Harper. When he heard what I was doing, he gave me a dozen bales for free. "Your grandfather fixed my tractor back in '69, Bill said. Refused to take any money for it, said neighbors help neighbors. This is me returning the favor. I was starting to understand something important. I thought I was alone out here, but I was not. My grandfather had spent years quietly helping people in this community, never asking for anything in return. And now that I was here, those people were helping me. Not because they had to, because they wanted to. A community is not just a place, Jack. It is a web of connections built on small kindnesses over time. Your grandfather taught me that. One night about 2 weeks after I arrived, I was lying on my blanket, almost asleep, when I heard something outside. Footsteps. Slow and deliberate, moving through the gravel near the Quonset door. My heart stopped. In the darkness, every story about the criminals my grandfather mentioned came rushing back. They found me. They tracked me down. I was going to die alone in this metal shed, and no one would ever know. I lay perfectly still, not breathing, my hand closed around the small knife I kept under my blanket, the only weapon I had. The footsteps stopped right outside the door. A long silence, then a snorting sound, loud and wet, and the click of hooves on stone. A deer, just a deer looking for food. I let out my breath in a rush that left me dizzy, lay there shaking for an hour before I could calm down enough to sleep. But that fear stayed with me, a reminder that my past might still be hunting me. I could not afford to forget it. The electrical system was the most important project, and the most terrifying. My grandfather's plans were detailed and clear, but they were designed for 1975 technology. No solar panels. Those were far too expensive for a teenager with limited funds. Instead, he had designed a system using car batteries and a small gasoline generator. The batteries would store power, the generator would charge them, and the whole system would run 12-volt lights, the same kind used in cars and trucks. Simple in theory, terrifying in practice. I made my first trip to the garage in town to learn about batteries. Earl was the mechanic there, a man in his 60s with grease permanently embedded in the creases of his hands. He took one look at me and my grandfather's diagrams and started teaching. Electricity can kill you, son, Earl said. Never forget that. Always disconnect the power before you touch anything. Always. I listened to every word, took notes, asked questions until Earl's patience ran thin, and then came back the next day with more questions. I bought 2 car batteries from Earl, used ones that still held a charge. He gave me a discount because I was Henry Cole's grandson. That name opened doors everywhere I went. The generator was harder to find. Eventually, I located a small one at a farm auction. Cost me more than I wanted to spend, but my grandfather's notes said the generator was essential. The batteries meant nothing if I could not charge them. Installing the system took weeks. I ran wires along the walls following diagrams that I had memorized until I could see them when I closed my eyes. I mounted the batteries on a wooden shelf I built from scrap lumber, connected them in parallel exactly as the instructions described. The moment of truth came on a cold afternoon in November. I had wired a single 12-volt bulb to the system, the kind of bulb used in car dome lights, maybe 25 watts, not much by city standards, but for me, it meant everything. I checked every connection one more time, then I held my breath and flipped the switch. The bulb flickered, then it glowed. Steady and warm and golden, I stood there in the middle of my Quonset watching that small circle of light push back the darkness. It was not much, just enough to read by, just enough to see what I was doing, just enough to feel like I was not completely alone in the dark. But it meant everything. I laughed out loud, a real laugh full of relief and joy and something close to triumph, the first genuine laugh I had made in months, maybe years. The darkness was still there waiting at the edges of the light, but it was not winning anymore. I had made fire. I had stolen it from the gaze and brought it into my metal cave, and that meant I could do anything. Winter arrived in December with a vengeance. I had installed the wood stove by then, following my grandfather's diagrams with obsessive care. The stove was secondhand, a potbelly model I bought from Frank for $30. Installing the chimney through the metal roof was the most nerve-wracking work I had done yet. One mistake and I could burn the whole place down, but I did not make a mistake. I measured and remeasured, cut the hole precisely, wrapped it with fire-resistant material, sealed every gap. When I lit the first fire and felt the heat spreading through the Quonset, I nearly cried again. Warmth, real warmth, something I had not felt since leaving the city. I learned the rhythm of living with a wood stove that winter, splitting wood in the afternoon so it would be dry enough to burn, banking the fire at night so the coals would last until morning, waking in a cold room and coaxing those embers back to life with kindling and patience. It was hard work, constant work, but it kept me alive. Then in January, a man came looking for me. I had walked into town for supplies. The snow was deep and the trip took nearly 3 hours each way. At Frank's store, I noticed a stranger, a man in his 40s wearing an expensive leather coat, the kind of coat no one in Braxton would own. His eyes were cold and sharp, and they swept the room like searchlights. He was talking to Frank when I walked in, and when he saw me, something flickered in his gaze. Recognition, maybe, or calculation. "I am looking for information about a family that used to live around here," the stranger said to Frank. "The name is Cole, Henry Cole. I heard he had a grandson." My blood turned to ice. Frank glanced at me. So quick I almost missed it. Then he turned back to the stranger with a face as blank as stone. "Henry Cole died 2 years back," Frank said. "As for any grandson, I would not know. Have not heard about anyone new coming through. This area is pretty spread out. People come and go, though." The stranger studied Frank for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "Left a business card on the counter. If you see anyone, let me know," he said. "There is a reward for useful information." He walked out without looking at me again. The bell above the door chimed as it closed behind him. Frank picked up the card, looked at it, tore it in half. "You were not here," he said to me quietly, "and you did not hear anything." "Understand," I nodded, my throat too dry to speak. Go home, Frank said. Do not come to town for a while. I will send word if anything happens. That night I lay awake in the Quonset listening to every sound. The wind, the creak of metal, the skitter of mice in the walls. Every noise could be footsteps. Every shadow could be a threat. The man was looking for me. The people who killed my parents were still out there, still hunting, and they knew I existed. 2 weeks later, the blizzard came. They called it an Alberta Clipper, a storm that roared down from Canada, with winds that screamed across the plains and snow that fell so thick you could not see your hand in front of your face. I had prepared as best I could. Firewood stacked high, food stored in cans, water in jugs, but I had not prepared for what nature could really do. On the second night, the wind reached nearly 60 miles per hour. It found every gap in my repairs, every weakness I had missed. And in the darkest hour of the night, I heard a sound that would haunt my dreams for years. A crack like a gunshot, then a roar of wind and snow. A section of the roof had collapsed under the weight of the accumulated snow, the part I had not finished reinforcing. Cold and white poured into the Quonset like a living thing, trying to devour everything I had built. The temperature inside dropped instantly. The fire in my stove guttered and nearly went out. I scrambled in the darkness, fighting to save what I could. My hands went numb within minutes. My fingers stopped working. But I fought. I dragged a tarp from my supplies and tried to cover the hole. The wind ripped it from my grasp twice. The third time I tied ropes to the corners and climbed up into the nightmare. Nailed it down with frozen fingers that could barely hold the hammer. When the hole was covered, I collapsed by the stove, shaking so hard I could barely add wood to the dying fire. My breath came in wafts. My whole body felt like it was shutting down. I do not know how close I came to dying that night. Close enough that I could feel it. The darkness pressing in, the cold reaching for my heart. But I made a choice in that moment. A choice I have made every day since. You cannot have me, I said out loud. My voice was raw and barely human. I have come too far to die like this. The fire caught. The flames grew. Warmth slowly returned. I sat there all night, feeding that fire and waiting for dawn. And when the sun finally rose and the storm cleared, I looked at the damage and knew exactly what I had to do. The next 2 weeks were the hardest of my life. I climbed onto that snow-covered roof every day, patched and reinforced and sealed. One slip and I would have fallen to the frozen ground below. One mistake and I would have died alone with no one to find me until spring. But I did not slip. I did not make a mistake. I finished the repairs. And when it was done, I stood back and looked at what I had built. Not just a roof, not just a shelter, a testament to what I was willing to endure, a monument to the simple, stubborn refusal to give up. Spring came slowly that year, but when it came, it felt like resurrection. The snow melted, the world turned green, and I felt like I was waking from a nightmare. I had survived. My Quonset had survived. We had made it through together. I planted a garden using seeds I ordered from a catalog, following diagrams I had found in the library. Potatoes, carrots, beans, tomatoes. Watching those first green shoots push up from the dark earth was a miracle. More food, more life, more proof that I could make things grow. The Quonset was no longer a shell. It was a home. I had built a sleeping area with walls made from salvaged wood, a small kitchen with a counter and a dry sink, a table and chair I found at the town cleanup day. Everything in it was something I had built or fixed or earned. Every board, every nail, every patch on the walls. It was not much by any standard, but it was mine. One day that spring, a girl drove up the gravel road in her father's truck. Her name was Sarah Dawson, Frank's daughter. 17 years old with brown hair and gray eyes and a smile that made me forget how to speak. "So you were the boy living in the Quonset," she said. Not a question, a statement of fact. "Word gets around," I managed to say. "Small town. Gossip moves faster than the internet." She looked around at what I had built. The repaired walls, the garden plot freshly turned, the firewood stacked neatly against the south side. "Dad says you did all this yourself," she said. "The electrical system, the stove, everything." I had instructions and a lot of help from people in town. She shook her head. Instructions do not mean anything if you do not have the guts to follow. This is impressive. That was the first time anyone had looked at me like I had accomplished something. Not with pity, not with suspicion, with respect. Sarah started coming by regularly after that, sometimes with books, sometimes with food her mother had made, sometimes just to talk. I asked my grandson years later if I had loved her. The truth is yes. Sarah Dawson was my first love. She taught me that I was worth caring about, worth spending time with, worth knowing. But first loves rarely last, and ours did not. She went to college in Seattle like she always dreamed. The distance and time did what they always do to young hearts. But I have never forgotten what she gave me. The gift of seeing myself through someone else's eyes and liking what I saw. Then I found the hidden room. It was May. I was repairing a section of the interior wall when I noticed something strange. One part of the metal sounded hollow when I knocked on it, different from the rest. I carefully peeled back the insulation I had installed, and there behind it was a small door, about 4 feet high, painted to match the surrounding metal, almost invisible if you were not looking for it. My heart hammered as I pulled it open. Inside was a space about 8 feet square, built cleverly into the curved wall of the Quonset where no one would think to look. There was a small desk, a bookshelf, a metal filing cabinet. On the shelf were books and photo albums. I opened the first album and my breath caught in my throat. Pictures of my grandfather as a young man, wearing his army uniform in World War II. Pictures of a beautiful woman who must have been my grandmother, the one I never knew. Pictures of my father as a child. And on the last page, a photograph of me at 4 years old, sitting in my grandfather's lap, both of us laughing. I did not remember that picture being taken. I did not remember ever being that happy with him. But there it was, proof that once before everything fell apart, we had been a family. In the filing cabinet, I found something else. Files about an organization called the Consortium, newspaper clippings, handwritten notes, diagrams showing how they operated, and a folder labeled the Cole case. Inside were copies of the police report from my parents' death, covered with my grandfather's notes. Not an accident, one note said. Brakes were sabotaged. Police investigation incomplete. Corruption. At the bottom of the cabinet was another envelope with my name on it. A second letter. Nathan. If you found this room, it means you have stayed long enough to truly explore. Good. The files here are everything I know about the people who killed your parents. I spent years gathering this information, hoping someday I could bring them to justice. I failed. I was too old, too alone. I do not ask you to seek revenge. That path is too dangerous. But I want you to know the truth. Truth is a weapon. Keep it safe. If anyone comes looking for you, a man named Whitmore or anyone asking about the Cole family, do not trust them. They are not looking for truth. They are looking to bury it. The best revenge is to live, to build a good life they cannot touch. I love you, grandson. That night I sat in the hidden room and read every file. The name Whitmore burned into my memory. The man at Frank's store. He was connected to the people who murdered my parents, and he was looking for me. Part of me wanted to run, take what money I had left and disappear, start over somewhere else. But another part of me refused. Running meant abandoning everything I had built. Running meant letting them win. Running meant giving up the home my grandfather had sacrificed everything to give me. The next morning I went to see Frank. I know about Whitmore, I said. I know who he is. Frank looked at me for a long moment. Then he nodded. Your grandfather told me this day might come. He said if it did, I should help you. Help me how? By keeping watch. By letting you know if anyone comes asking. By protecting you the way neighbors protect each other. He opened a drawer behind the counter and took something out. A small handgun and a box of ammunition. This was your grandfather's, Frank said. He left it with me for safekeeping. Said you might need it someday. I will teach you to shoot, and pray you never have to use it. I looked at that gun. I had never held one in my life, but I was learning that the world was not safe. That the past could reach out and grab you no matter how far you ran. That sometimes the only choice was to stand your ground. I took the gun, and I made a decision. This was my home. This was my life, and I would defend it. The fire had burned down to embers. Jack and I had been talking for hours. The Montana night stretched around us, vast and silent and full of stars. My grandson was looking at me differently now. The anger that had twisted his features when he first arrived was almost gone. In its place was something I had been hoping to see: understanding. "So this Whitmore guy," Jack said. "Did he come back?" I nodded slowly and watched the last flames flicker among the coals. He did. And that was when I learned the most important lesson of my life. The summer of 1976 was the most peaceful time I had known since my parents died. The garden flourished. Tomatoes ripened on the vine. Carrots pushed up from the dark earth. Beans climbed the wooden stakes I had built for them. Every morning I walked the rows and marveled at what I had grown from nothing. The Quonset was truly a home now. I had added real windows, glass panes I bought from a demolished house in the next county. Frank let me use his truck to haul them back. I built frames from salvaged lumber and sealed them tight against the weather. For the first time since arriving, I could see outside without opening a door. Could watch the sunrise paint the mountains gold and pink without leaving my bed. The electrical system had grown too. More batteries, a bigger generator, enough power to run lights in every corner, and even a small radio that picked up stations from 3 states away. Music filled the Quonset in the evenings. Country songs and news broadcasts and late-night talk shows that made me feel connected to a world I had left behind. People in town had stopped treating me like a stranger. They called me by name when I walked into Frank's store. Martha at the library saved books she thought I would enjoy. Earl at the garage waved when I passed. I was not one of them yet. Not fully. But I was no longer an outsider. I was just the coal boy up at the old Miller place, the one who was making a go of it. Sarah came by almost every week that summer. We would sit on the bench I had built outside the Quonset door and watch the sun set behind the mountains. She talked about her dreams of college and seeing the world beyond Montana. I talked about my plans for the property. A greenhouse maybe, or a workshop where I could repair things for people in town. We were young and full of hope, and the future seemed like an endless road stretching toward the horizon. Then August came and everything changed. Frank called me into town with an urgent message. When I arrived at his store, his face was grim. "Whitmore is back," he said. His voice was low, even though we were alone. I saw his car at the motel outside town. "And he is not alone this time." My stomach dropped. How many? 2 others with him. Big men, the kind who do not smile. I thought about the hidden room and the files inside. Thought about my grandfather's letter warning me about this exact moment. What should I do? Frank looked at me with eyes that had seen more than I could imagine. "That is your choice, son. But if it were me, I would not run. Running just tells them they can chase you forever. Sometimes you have to stand and let them know the chase is over." 2 days later, I was working in the garden when I heard a car engine. Not the familiar rattle of a truck from town. Something smoother, more expensive. A black sedan rolled up the gravel drive and stopped near the Quonset. Eli Whitmore stepped out of the back seat. 2 large men followed him. They wore dark suits that did not belong in Montana, and their eyes swept the property like predators scanning for prey. Whitmore was older than I remembered, maybe 50. Gray at his temples and lines around his mouth that suggested a lifetime of frowning. But his eyes were the same, cold and calculating and completely without warmth. "Nathan Cole," he said, "we need to talk." I stood up slowly. My hands were dirty from the garden. I wiped them on my jeans and felt the weight of the small pistol tucked into my waistband at the small of my back. Frank had insisted I carry it whenever I left the Quonset. "You were not invited," I said. "I do not need an invitation." Whitmore smiled, but it never reached his eyes. "I go where I please and I take what I want. That is how the world works for people like me." He looked around at what I had built. The repaired Quonset, the garden, the neat stacks of firewood, the windows gleaming in the afternoon sun. "You have done more with this place than I expected," he said. The old man would be proud. "Do not talk about my grandfather." Whitmore laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. "Henry Cole was a thorn in our side for years, collecting information, asking questions, trying to build a case against us. He thought he was clever hiding you in the foster system. Thought we would forget about the debt your parents owed." He took a step closer. His bodyguards flanked him like shadows. "But we never forget. and debts must be paid. My parents are dead, I said. Whatever they owed, I damn it with a ham. That is not how this works. Whitmore's smile vanished. Your grandfather had files, documents, things that could cause problems for important people. I know they exist, and I know they are here somewhere. I do not have anything. Do not lie to me, boy. He spat the last word like a curse. Your parents lied to us. Look where it got them. A cold fury rose in my chest, the same fury that had kept me alive through that first terrible winter, the same stubbornness that refused to let me quit when everything seemed impossible. Is that a threat, I asked? You are threatening a minor on his own property. I think the sheriff might be interested in that. Whitmore laughed again. You think some small-town sheriff can protect you? You think anyone out here can stand against us? We own people you have never heard of. Police, judges, politicians. One phone call and your whole life disappears. Maybe I said, but here's the thing. Those files you are looking for, they are not here. Whitmore's eyes narrowed. I sent copies to 3 different places, I continued. A lawyer, a journalist, and somewhere else you will never find. If anything happens to me, anything at all, everything gets published. Names, dates, bank accounts, every piece of evidence my grandfather collected over 20 years. I was bluffing. Partially. I had sent copies, but I was not certain they would ever be open. Not certain anyone would care about the contents. But Whitmore did not know that. You are lying, he said. But there was uncertainty in his voice now. Maybe I am. Do you want to find out? Because if I am telling the truth and you hurt me, then you have a much bigger problem than one kid in Montana. Silence stretched between us. The 2 bodyguards looked at Whitmore, waiting for instructions. Their hands hovered near their jackets, where I assumed they kept weapons far more impressive than my small pistol. The moment balanced on a knife's edge. Then in the distance, I heard the sound of an engine, another vehicle coming up the gravel road. Whitmore heard it too. His jaw tightened. A truck appeared around the bend, Frank's truck, and behind it a patrol car with lights flashing. The cavalry, I said. Small towns have one advantage. Everyone knows everyone else's business, and they look out for their own. Whitmore's face went dark with rage, but he was calculating too, weighing his options. The truck and patrol car were getting closer. This is not over, he said. Maybe not. But if you come back, you better be ready for a very public fight, because I am not hiding anymore. He stared at me for a long moment. Something shifted in his eyes, not respect exactly, but acknowledgement, recognition that I was not the easy target he had expected. Your father was brave too, Whitmore said quietly, right up until the end. Then he turned and walked back to his car. His bodyguards followed. The black sedan reversed down the gravel drive and disappeared into the trees just as Frank's truck pulled up. Frank jumped out with a shotgun in his hands. Behind him, the patrol car stopped and Sheriff Caldwell stepped out. A big man in his 60s with a weathered face and eyes that had seen every kind of trouble. You all right? Son Frank asked. I nodded. My heart was still pounding, but my voice was steady. I am fine. They left. Sheriff Caldwell walked over and looked down the road where the sedan had vanished. And that was Whitmore, he said. Not a question. Yes. Your grandfather warned me about him years ago. Said if he ever came around asking questions, I should keep an eye out. The sheriff turned to face me. You did good standing up to him. But watch your back. Men like that do not forget. I know I said. I am counting on it. Eli Whitmore never came back. Not that year. Not the next. Never. For a long time I wondered why. Maybe my bluff had worked. Maybe the files were more dangerous than he wanted to risk. Maybe the cost of dealing with me was simply not worth the trouble for people who had bigger concerns. Or maybe something else happened. Years later, I received a letter. No return address, postmarked from Washington, D.C. Inside was a single sheet of paper with typed words. The information has reached the right people. The investigation is complete. Thank you for your grandfather's courage and your own. Live well. That is the best revenge. I never learned who sent it. Never knew exactly what happened to Whitmore or the organization he worked for, but I understood the message. My grandfather had not just been collecting files out of anger or grief. He had been working with someone, building a case, preparing evidence, and somehow I had finished what he started. I told this to Jack as the fire died down to ashes. So they just disappeared, he asked. The bad guys lost. I thought about how to answer that. I do not know if they lost, I said. I do not know if there is ever really winning and losing in these things. But they stopped coming after me, and I got to live my life. That was enough. The years after Whitmore left were the best of my life. I finished my GED studying at night by the light of my 12-volt bulbs. Then I enrolled in the community college 2 towns over, took the bus every morning before dawn, came home every evening to tend the garden and the Quonset. I got a degree in electrical work, started a small business installing and repairing systems for farms and remote homes in the area. People trusted me because I was Henry Cole's grandson, because I had proven I could survive, because I showed up when I said I would and did honest work for fair prices. Sarah went to Seattle for college. We tried to make the long-distance thing work, but time and distance did what they always do. She met someone else. I was heartbroken, but I understood. We were young, life was long. There would be other chances for both of us. And there were. I met your grandmother at a church social when I was 25. Margaret was a teacher who had come to Braxton from Minnesota. Smart and kind and stubborn in ways that reminded me of myself. She was not impressed by my Quonset or my business or my story. She was impressed by how I treated people, by the way I listened when she talked, by the patience I showed with her students when I volunteered to fix the school's electrical problems. We married a year later. Your father was born in 1980, Michael, named after my own father. I watched my son grow up in the Quonset that I built with my own hands. Watched him learn to garden and repair things and stand on his own 2 feet. I tried to teach him everything my grandfather had taught me, about hard work, about patience, about building something that lasts. The Quonset grew too. We added rooms, real insulation, modern solar panels when they finally became affordable in the 1990s. By the time Michael was grown, it was a real house, not fancy, but solid, full of memories and love and the accumulated work of decades. And then 3 months ago, Michael died. I stopped talking. The fire had gone completely out. Only starlight remained. Jack was watching me with wet eyes. For the first time since he arrived, he looked like a son who had lost his father. Not an angry young man who wanted to burn the world, just a kid who was hurting. He was on a job site, I said. Construction work. Something fell. They said it was fast. He did not suffer. I felt the familiar ache that I had been carrying for 90 days. It never went away. It just became part of you. Losing a child is not supposed to happen, I continued. Parents are supposed to go first. That is the deal. But life does not always keep its deals. And you learn that you can survive even the things you thought would destroy you, how Jack whispered. How do you survive it? The same way you survive anything, one day at a time, 1 hour at a time, one moment at a time. You keep breathing, keep moving, keep doing the next thing that needs to be done. And eventually the weight becomes bearable. Not lighter, just bearable. We sat in silence for a long time after that. The stars wheeled overhead. The mountains stood patient and eternal in the darkness. The next morning I took Jack to the hidden room. It was still there after all these years, unchanged except for the things I had added. Photos of Margaret and Michael and Jack himself as a baby. My journals from decades of living on this land. And the plans, always the plans. Ideas for improvements that I never finished. Projects waiting for hands younger than mine. This is where I keep the legacy I told him. Not money, not gold, stories, lessons, truth. I handed him a key. This opens the room, I said, and this one opens the Quonset. He looked at the keys in his hand, confusion on his face. What are you saying? I am saying what my grandfather said to me. This place is not a gift. It is an opportunity. I am not giving you a home. I am giving you the chance to build one. I am not giving you a life. I am giving you the tools to create your own. But I do not know how to do any of this. I cannot build things. I cannot fix things. I cannot. Neither could I said. I was 16 years old with nothing but a pile of junk and some handwritten instructions. I did not know how to patch a roof or wire a light or plant a garden. I learned. I failed. I tried again. And eventually I figured it out. Jack looked at the keys, looked at me. looked around the hidden room with its books and photos and decades of accumulated wisdom. "What if I am not strong enough?" he asked. "You are," I said. "You are my grandson. You come from people who survived impossible things. That strength is in your blood. You just have not found it yet." I thought about my grandfather, about the choice he made to protect me, even though it meant letting me believe he did not care, about the years he spent preparing this place for someone he might never see. And I thought about my son Michael, about all the things I had tried to teach him, about the way he had smiled when he learned to plant a seed or wire a switch or fix something that was broken. The legacy is not what you inherit, I told Jack. It is what you learn and build and pass on to the next generation. Your father learned from me, and now I will teach you, and someday you will teach someone else. I want to stay, Jack said. The words came out quiet, almost a whisper, at least for a while. I want to learn what you know. I felt something ease in my chest, a knot I had been carrying for months finally beginning to loosen. Good, I said, because I have a lot to teach, and we have work to do. That evening we sat on the porch together and watched the sunset behind the mountains. The sky turned gold and orange and deep purple. The Quonset stood solid and patient behind us. 50 years of repairs and improvements and memories woven into its metal walls. "Were you ever scared?" Jack asked. "When you first came here? When Whitmore showed up? Were you scared?" "I was terrified," I said, "every single day. But fear is not the opposite of courage. Fear is the prerequisite. You cannot be brave unless you are afraid first. And it was worth it. Everything you went through, it was worth it." I looked at my grandson, at the mountains stretching to the horizon, at the home I had built from nothing. "Yes," I said, "it was worth it. Not because it was easy, because it was hard, because every difficult moment taught me something I needed to know, because every failure made me stronger, because by the time I got through it all, I knew exactly who I was and what I was capable of." I stood up slowly, bones creaking from 70 years of use. "Come on," I said. "Let me show you how the solar panels work. Tomorrow we start your education." Jack followed me around the side of the Quonset where the modern panels I had installed years ago tilted toward the fading sun. I began explaining how they worked. The same basic principles I had learned from car batteries and generators back in 1975. The same lessons my grandfather had left in those handwritten diagrams. The technology had changed, but the fundamentals remained. Gather energy while the sun shines, store it for the darkness. Use it wisely so it lasts. That was true of electricity. It was also true of life. As I talked, I saw something change in Jack's eyes. The grief was still there. It would always be there, but something else was growing alongside it. Interest, purpose, the first flicker of engagement with the future that might be worth living. That was all I could give him. Not answers, not solutions. Just a chance, an opportunity, a place to stand and build something new. The same gift my grandfather had given me 50 years ago. I am Nathan Cole. I came to this land with $15 and a rusted metal shed and no idea how I was going to survive. I leave it with a home and a family and a story that I hope might help someone else. This is what I know. Character is not what you are given. It is what you build. It is the sum of every choice you make when no one is watching. Every time you get up after falling down. Every moment you decide to keep going when everything tells you to quit. You do not need wealth to build a life worth living. You do not need a perfect past. You do not need anyone's permission. You just need to start, right where you are, with whatever you have. That is all any of us ever has. This moment, these hands, this chance. Make something of it. Build something that lasts. And when you are done, pass it on to someone who needs it as badly as you once did. That is the inheritance. That is the legacy. That is the only thing that really matters in the end. I finished explaining the solar panels to Jack as the last light faded from the sky. Stars began appearing one by one like old friends returning home. The same stars my grandfather had watched. The same stars I would leave behind someday. My grandson stood beside me, looking up at the universe stretching above us. "I think I understand now," he said. "Understand what? Why you are not afraid. Why you can be calm when everything hurts. It is not that you do not feel it. It is that you know you can survive it, because you already have." I put my hand on his shoulder, the same way Frank had put his hand on mine 50 years ago in his hardware store. Now you know too, I said. Now you have the story, and the story is stronger than fear. We walked back to the porch together, back to the home I had built from scraps and stubbornness and the refusal to quit. Tomorrow the work would begin again. Tomorrow I would start teaching my grandson everything I knew. But tonight we sat in silence and watched the stars and let the peace of the mountains settle into our bones. This was the ending I never expected, the legacy I never planned, the gift that had been given to me and that I was now passing on. Not money, not land, not a building, just the truth, just the story, just the knowledge that we are all capable of more than we imagine. That is what my grandfather gave me. That is what I give to you. Now go build something.